Honestly, we have a lot to talk about with this device and I am so excited. I've never been an iPad guy. I always viewed it as this awkward middle device that didn't fit anywhere in my life. I've always had a big phone and a big laptop, and between those two devices, I never needed a third that didn't have the utility or the functionality of the other two. But this pandemic has changed the way the world works, and I have seen so many people absolutely loving their iPads as entertainment devices. My best friend swears by his 11-inch iPad Pro, and he uses it for everything. And because of that, I started getting swayed. I walked into the Apple store, started playing with the iPad Air, and I still couldn't justify it. It was too big, too expensive, and it was still this awkward middle child. Then the M1 iPad Pros were announced, and I was so excited we might be getting macOS on an iPad for the first time ever, and even if we don't get macOS, we might be getting some desktop class features in iPadOS, so I was very excited. And then Apple didn't announce that. We just got iPadOS 15, and they made it very clear that the iPad is never going to be a true laptop replacement because they don't want it competing with their MacBooks. So when the rumors started swirling about a redesigned iPad mini with the new design language, I was very intrigued. I'd always loved the original iPad mini and its size, but I could never justify buying it, and I didn't like the chunky bezels and the fact that it was a very neglected Apple product. Then Apple announced the new iPad mini, and it was everything I wanted it to be. The new design language, brand new beautiful display, Touch ID, second-gen Apple support, brand new cameras and speakers, the A15 chip, USB-C, and it even came in my favorite color, purple. That new design language means that we've gotten rid of the home button and the forehead and chin in favor of uniform bezels around the entire device, just like the iPad Air. Initially, I was a little bit worried that these bezels were too big, but after getting the iPad in my hand and using it, they're the perfect size. This in turn gives the device a large 8.3-inch laminated Retina display. It's an IPS panel, so no OLED or mini LED, and it's also a 60Hz display, so no 120 Pro motion on this device. But honestly, that's not a big deal for me. It has a 2266 by 1488 resolution with a 326 ppi, featuring the P3 color gamut, and of course, True Tone. I think the weakest part about this display is the 500 nit peak brightness. I usually find myself keeping the screen between 70 and 100% brightness just to feel comfortable and to see everything. Sure, when it's 3 AM and you're binge watching Netflix, it's nice that the brightness can get dim, but it's always nice to have a brighter screen. This is a fairly minor gripe, however. I've been loving watching YouTube videos, Netflix, and Disney Plus on this display, and content looks great. The Mini now also gets stereo speakers in landscape orientation, and they're fine. You can watch content and listen to music straight from the iPad, and it's very acceptable. Nothing that will blow you away, but good. I have found that they are fairly easy to cover if you're holding the device, so you might want to get a case or a stand. The volume buttons being on the top left are actually wonderful because, like most people, I'm watching content mostly in that landscape orientation, and having the buttons on the side is nice. Also, fun little cool trick that is so genius you might not even notice it, the up and down volume buttons detect which way the device is being held and adapt to make sure that no matter what, the button facing up is volume up. Genius. It really is the little things that Apple nails. Touch ID is good on this device. It's the same as the iPad Air. In a pandemic world where we're still wearing masks, I do prefer Touch ID to Face ID. However, I do tend to use this iPad more in the house than out of the house, and there are times where I go to unlock it and it's just not unlocking and I wonder why, and then I remember it's not Face ID, it's Touch ID, so I put my finger on the scanner. But whenever I'm out of the house, I much prefer Touch ID. And speaking of out of the house, I've been taking this device with me everywhere. It's the perfect size. I cannot stress enough how much I love this thing. I've been using it more than my iPhone 13 Pro Max. It's the size of a book, small, thin, and light. I can carry it, I can put it in a small bag. It's just so portable, I never think twice about bringing it with me. There's a reason why e-readers like the Kindle are that size. I love that I can comfortably hold this iPad in one hand, something I didn't like on its bigger brothers. If I had a larger iPad, I definitely would not bring it with me everywhere. I have my big-ass 16-inch MacBook Pro, which I view as my mobile desktop workstation, so while it is portable, I don't enjoy bringing it with me everywhere. I usually reserve that as my dedicated professional photo and video editing device. But my iPad mini does everything else. Because of that A15 chip, this thing is no slouch. It's actually more powerful than the current iPad Air because that is rocking an older chip. You can edit photos and videos on this thing. I've personally been editing photos from my Fuji X-E4 on here when I'm out and about, and it handles it flawlessly. And because of that USB-C port, I can plug in a bunch of accessories, like a hard drive for when I'm editing, a microphone for when I want to record, or a dongle for when I want to go absolutely crazy with an SD card, USB-A devices, and an HDMI out to a TV or a monitor. Not only is it no slouch for productivity, but it is absolutely amazing for gaming. I have a whole separate video on this, but I've been loving it for gaming. Again, because of that size, it's so portable and easy to just bring this along, just like a Nintendo Switch. I've been playing a ton of Genshin Impact on this thing. I hook up my controller and play for hours. I've also been loving Pokemon Unite. Both of these games play very smoothly at 60 FPS, and it is a wonderful portable console to play on. The cameras have gotten a nice update too. The back camera now gets True Tone flash and a new 12 megapixel f1.8 sensor and lens. You can now shoot up to 4K 60 on it. Photos and videos are fine. It's an iPad. Even with its smaller form factor, I don't recommend shooting photos or videos with this thing. The back camera for me is mostly for document scanning and showing off what's in front of me on FaceTime. And speaking of FaceTime, the camera that really matters on this thing, the front-facing camera. This is a 12 megapixel 1080p ultra wide angle lens with an f2.4 aperture. Great for selfies, but really great for video calls. Great image quality, and it features center stage, which I absolutely love. The few people I FaceTime with thought that my iPad was on some sort of robotic stand that was tracking me while I called them. It's a great feature and I love it. Now with all these amazing features and power in this small design, you might be worried about battery life. Don't be. This thing has great battery life. Battery life is going to be wildly different for everyone depending on what you're doing with this, but for me, I'm definitely getting one full day out of this even with my couple of gaming hours. If I'm not gaming on this, I could easily manage 2 days of battery life. It's not going to be that insane week-long battery life of its older iPad brothers, but I don't mind charging it 2 to 3 times a week. On longer gaming sessions, I do plug in the iPad to power just to make sure it's not draining beyond compare, but I've had zero issues with battery life. Now, let's talk about the very few things that some people might consider issues on this device. Because of that new and larger screen, the aspect ratio has changed. When you're viewing content, it's really nice because it's closer to regular aspect ratios, meaning less top and bottom black bars and wasted space. But what that translates to is very few apps actually being updated for this new aspect ratio. In a lot of apps, you're going to see some black bars on the side because they haven't been updated for iPad mini, and they're still scaling based off of the bigger iPad and older mini models. Not a huge issue, but it is there for the time being until we get some updates. Speaking of scaling, a lot of tech YouTubers have been complaining about the scaling of iPadOS on this device. Widgets are smaller than on the iPhone, there's a lot of wasted space on the sides, especially in landscape mode. Another thing is that there can be some issues with touch targets. Because things are smaller on this smaller device, touch targets are also smaller, which means you need to be more precise in your taps, and you might occasionally find yourself tapping multiple times to get something just right. It also means you're not going to want many apps in your dock because, good lord, these things get minuscule when you start putting more than a couple on there. What I will say to that is, it doesn't really bother me. I feel like way too many people are complaining about very small things. I don't want 1,000 apps in my dock. Hell, even on my desktop, my dock is hella minimalist. That's what Spotlight is for. Or just arrange apps in a way that's better for you. Sure, it would have been nice to take advantage of that wasted padding space, but it's not a huge deal. What I'm more annoyed with is that when I go to type, the keyboard takes up more than half the tablet. But again, this is not a huge deal. Another thing that's been completely blown out of proportion is jelly scrolling. When the news broke about this, the tech community was up in arms about how a tablet of this price point shouldn't have this issue. And I agree, a tablet of this price point should not be having this issue. That being said, it's not an issue. Unless you're on a text-rich page, furiously scrolling up and down, pixel peeping, explicitly trying to elicit the exact circumstances where you might be able to see jelly scrolling, you're not going to notice. 99% of people aren't going to notice. If you're just normally scrolling, it's not really an issue, and it completely goes away in landscape orientation. This is not a deal breaker by any means, and if you're holding out on buying this tablet because of this, don't. On the topic of buying, who is this iPad for? Honestly, I think this is the iPad for everyone. It does everything well, it's the perfect size, and as someone who never saw himself owning an iPad, I've fallen in love with this device. If you're debating between this iPad and a bigger iPad, I think they're completely different devices. The bigger iPads can be accessorized to be laptop replacements, whereas this iPad knows exactly what it is. There's no smart connector, so no first-party smart keyboards from Apple, only the slim folio case. The iPad mini fits beautifully in between my phone and my laptop with its own specific purpose. And I even use it as a secondary display on my laptop with Sidecar. Students will love it for note-taking, and I know pilots love this kind of form factor. And because of that second-gen Apple Pencil support, even artists and graphic designers will really appreciate this. I will say, however, if you're viewing the iPad as a professional creative tool, I'd probably go for the larger iPads because there's a bigger canvas for you to work on. But if you just want to have fun drawing and taking notes with the Apple Pencil, this is the perfect size. Now, the pricing is where things get a little sus for me. Apple is advertising this iPad starting at $500, and while that is true, it is for the 64GB model, which in this day and age is absolute BS. It should have been a 128GB model. But not only is it 64 gigs, we don't even get a 128GB upgrade option. The only other option is 256GB, which is a $150 upgrade. Sure, if you're only going to be using this iPad mini as a Netflix device, you could probably get away with 64GB. But it's so powerful and so great at so many things, you're probably gonna want to do more than just Netflix on that. And if you're doing anything more than Netflix, you're gonna want more space. I think it's honestly criminal that Apple didn't include a 128GB option on this. That additional $150 to upgrade to 256 might not sound like much, but once you start accessorizing this iPad, things add up real fast. If you get a slim folio case, that's an additional $60. An Apple Pencil, an additional $130. Apple Care, $70. And then suddenly this $500 tablet is more than $900 before tax. And that is where things get a little expensive in my mind. Sure, I'm not buying the Apple Pencil because I don't need it, and you might not either. But if the base model was 128GB starting at $500, it would have been a lot better. But to be fair though, most iPads are all about how you accessorize them, and once you start adding accessories, the price is bound to go up. This iPad mini is my new favorite device. It does everything. It is so versatile. It doesn't replace my laptop or my phone, but it sits comfortably in between them with its own unique use case. It's the perfect content consumption device. I've been loving watching all sorts of videos on here, and I'm especially loving it for Twitter. Seeing photos take up this much screen real estate is just so beautiful. I can take notes and write video scripts when I'm out and about, and I can respond to emails without having to pull out my laptop. I can FaceTime friends and family with center stage on a big screen. I can even game with a controller on the go. This is honestly the perfect everyday companion device, and it will be amazing for traveling as well. But I want to know what you guys think. Are you excited about this iPad mini? Do you own one? Are you thinking about getting one? Let me know in the comment section down below. My name is Marc Steiner, and I'll see you next time.